Welcome to Journey to S4HANA, the podcast that covers everything related to SAP implementations. This podcast is not affiliated with SAP and covers the realistic truth behind S4HANA, Ariba, and SuccessFactors ERP implementation success. Whether you're new to the world of SAP, an existing ECC, or R3 customer, a multinational team, or a mid-sized organization, this podcast is for you. Now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
Welcome to episode number 3 of the Journey to S4HANA podcast. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their S4HANA implementations as well as their non-SAP digital transformations. This podcast is everything you need to know about S4HANA implementations, the good, the bad, the ugly, the tech agnostic view, the objective view, and the realities of what you need to know as you embark on your S4HANA journeys. With me, as always, is Darian Fiakuski. Darian, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me again.
Absolutely. The show is produced by Major Tom Productions. It's one of the podcasts that we produce for the B2B tech space. If you'd like to learn more about sponsorship opportunities or to feature your brand, your product or service on this podcast or some of our other podcasts that we produce, be sure to reach out to Mindy at Major Tom Productions. I've included her contact information below. So I've got a fun episode for you today. We're going to have a guest on to talk about S4HANA implementations, and it's a case study from a manufacturing client of ours here at Third Stage. So we have the actual client, the guy that was actually leading the project. They recently finished one of the major milestones in the project, and they've had some time to let the dust settle and look back and kind of reflect on what went well and where the struggles were. So we thought it'd be a perfect time to have him on the show to talk about some of those lessons and kind of hear it from an actual customer here today. So before we bring Karm on, though, we want to talk a little bit about another case study, which is the Hershey's SAP implementation failure from years ago, along with some questions from the audience. So why don't you guide us through that conversation, Darian?
Yeah, so this is a video that Eric posted on YouTube a while back, and we also posted on TikTok, and we got quite a few questions about the whole implementation itself. So Eric, if you will give us a little bit of background about the situation, then we will go into playing the video for them.
Yeah, so this is actually a TikTok video, as you mentioned, but there's also a full-length, deeper dive on YouTube where I go into the case study in about, I think, 12 or 15 minutes. So it's a little bit more extensive than what you're going to find on TikTok, but we'll play you the TikTok clip. And really, I wanted to create a video that looks at one of the most historic ERP implementation failures of all time. I mean, this was a big, massive failure for Hershey's and for SAP. And as we talk about in the video, there's just it was sort of a perfect storm of stuff that was happening. I mean, there was the seasonality of the Hershey's business certainly affected things because they were trying to roll the system out at a time that was their peak seasonality, and it didn't go well, as we talk about in the video. So because so many people have heard of the Hershey's implementation failure from years ago, we thought it'd be helpful to really unpack this. To be clear, by the way, Hershey's in this case study did not implement S4HANA. They implemented a legacy version of SAP, but some of the lessons from this case study are still extremely relevant to S4HANA implementations even here today. So with that being said, let's roll the quick TikTok video, and then we'll come back and cover some of the questions and comments we got from the audience on TikTok as well. So it's commonly known that Hershey's failed in its ERP implementation, but how do we know? What are the metrics that point to the fact that it was a failure? Well, first of all, let's start with the budget. The budget was $112 million SAP implementation. The company was implementing a legacy SAP product called R3 back in the late 90s. And they were doing this as a way to really modernize their systems, modernize their supply chain, and be able to scale on its way from being a $1 billion company to a $5 billion company at the time. But what happened at the end of the day, once they went through this project, is not only did it cost $112 million, which is a lot of money, especially back then, but it also resulted in Hershey's losing $150 million in sales at the time they went live. And the reason for this, which I'll get into a little bit later, is because they couldn't ship product that they had in stock largely. So that was part of the problem, is they couldn't track the inventory and they couldn't get the inventory out the door to customers when they needed it at a peak seasonal time. So that's a brief clip, Darian, from the longer form video that we have on YouTube. But that video was on TikTok. We got a lot of good engagement and views, and more importantly, a lot of comments and questions. What was some of the feedback and questions from that video?
Yeah, so one question that they had was, would a different approach with the SAP legacy software work for Hershey's? Was it just approached the wrong way? And what would that approach look like?
Yeah, great question. I think like a lot of implementation failures, this implementation seemed to have more to do with the overall strategy and the organization implementing itself more so than it did some sort of flaw with SAP. Now, you can't hold SAP completely, or you can't let SAP completely off the hook from a product and technology perspective. But I would venture to say, based on what I know about this case study, that it had more to do with Hershey's itself as well as the implementation strategy. I think first and foremost, the biggest thing is, you should never introduce new technology and go live on a new system with new processes at your peak seasonality. I mean, that's the worst time to do it. You're just exponentially increasing your risk. You don't have time to really work through and optimize the system because you're just trying to keep up with day-to-day demand, given the peak seasonality of whatever your seasonality is in your business. So you really have to plan things and ensure that even if it means you slow things down or you elongate the project or prolong the overall project, you want to go live at a time that is not your peak seasonality. It should be a time that's a relative lull to where you have some excess capacity and bandwidth to be able to deal with any hiccups that come out of these projects, which inevitably you're going to have hiccups. So you want to make sure you plan it better than they did here in this case. So I think that's probably the number one thing they should have done differently.
Yeah, that makes sense. And also, even though this was a long time ago, I think you touched on this before we rolled the clip, we can still take some of these key takeaways that they maybe could, or that we can learn from this big failure, implementation failure. What are some of those maybe key takeaways?
Yeah, I talk about some of them in that video as well as other SAP related failure videos on my YouTube and TikTok channels, by the way. And by the way, if you don't follow me on TikTok, you can find me there. Just look up Eric Kimberling if you want to learn more about SAP and ERP stuff in between watching cats and babies dancing or whatever you watch on TikTok. You can also look up Eric Kimberling and find some stuff about digital transformation in SAP. You can also find me on YouTube as well. So for more deep dive into that, I'd say be sure to subscribe to me on either or both of those channels or platforms. But I'd say in general, in addition to the implementation strategy that I talked about, the other thing is just making sure your processes are well defined, your future state, as well as how you test the software against that future state business process, because I suspect that a lot of the challenges that Hershey's had with inventory management and not being able to track orders and get orders to the customers at the right time during their peak seasonality time, I suspect a lot of that had to do with the fact that they didn't have their processes clearly defined, documented, and tested before they went live. If they had fully tested their system and fully tested the processes and all that stuff, they probably would have put the project not on hold, but they probably would have pushed the go live if they didn't want to disrupt their business. So those are a couple things. And then of course the change management piece of it, just making sure that you have a solid change management strategy and plan. I'd say that's the other big part of that as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm excited to now dive into our article that we have for today's podcast episode. So this article is discussing the critical factors for a successful SAP S4HANA implementation, highlighting the need for disciplined practices and careful planning. It emphasizes the importance of leveraging SAP's capabilities, investing in business process management, embracing organizational change, implementing quality assurance measures, and establishing an internal competency center. These strategies aim to mitigate risks and ensure effective digital transformations. So, Eric, with this, how do you think organizations can balance the need for innovation and transformation with the risks associated with a complex ERP deployments like SAP S4HANA?
Ooh, that's a good question. There's a lot to that. We could spend the whole episode talking about that one question. So I'll try to summarize it, but I'd say that, a lot of the things you mentioned, the change management and having a center of excellence or a competency of excellence, whatever they called it, a lot of those tactics and strategies you mentioned are very good ones. But I think what's even more important underlying your question is, when you're trying to drive innovation and process improvement and process optimization within your business. And that's sort of that utopia, ideal future state we're all trying to get at. But the problem is a lot of organizations, if not most organizations, struggle just to get basic functionality implemented successfully. So just being able to close the books, just being able to process orders, just being able to, pick, pack, and ship from the warehouse. Some of that basic fundamental stuff that organizations need to run their business, they have trouble being successful enough with their S4HANA implementation just to do the basic fundamentals. And they don't oftentimes get to that future state of innovation and, new capabilities around AI and machine learning and analytics and all this cool stuff that SAP can do. So I think the key is to, first of all, have realistic expectations. You're not going to get there overnight. Second of all, make sure that you manage your project really well and have solid governance in place so that you can get not only to that first phase or that first basic layer of functionality, but ultimately get to that ideal state of real process optimization, real technological improvement to your business. I'm oversimplifying it, of course, because there's a lot to that, and we'll unpack a lot of how to do that here in this podcast and future episodes. But those are some of the general things I would suggest to people that are trying to find that balance between risk and innovation and that state of utopia, we'll call it.
Yeah, absolutely. And getting to that place where maybe it's their desired business transformation outcome, I guess, is kind of what you are saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely. Yeah, well, that was some great questions and topics to start our podcast today. And I'm really excited for everybody to listen to our guest today. So I'm going to hand it over to Eric for our interview.
Yeah, this is a great guest. I'm excited to have him on. I've actually been trying to get him on one of my podcasts for years now. So he finally agreed. I think he's just, I know he's busy, first of all, but he's not a professional podcaster, so that might be part of it too. But I'm excited to have him on the show. He's going to be on here in just a moment. It's Karm Saliba, who is with one of our clients called Baltimore Aircoil Corporation. And they're a manufacturer, make-to-order, engineer-to-order manufacturing organization, recently implemented S4HANA, recently hit a major milestone in that implementation. He's going to be on the show talking about what did he learn from the experience, what went well, what didn't go well, what would he do differently, and what advice would he leave for those of you that are about to start on an S4HANA implementation. And this is a great interview too, because this is a customer's perspective. This isn't a consultant like me. It's not, an industry analyst. This is someone who actually is living with the results right now, day to day. So we're going to have him on the show here in just a moment, but we're going to take a quick break and then we'll bring him on the show. We'll be right back with more Journey to S4HANA podcast. Stay tuned. If you're going through an S4HANA implementation, you're looking for best practices and tips on how to make your project more successful, I encourage you to check out 2 resources that I made available to our listeners here on this podcast. First is our guide to a successful S4HANA implementation. It's a paper that I wrote based on all of our clients that have implemented S4HANA, some of the lessons we've learned, some of the best practices that we typically advise our clients to follow when going through their S4HANA implementation. So be sure to check that out. You can find that in the links below in this podcast. You can also scan the QR code right in front of you. The second thing you might want to check out is an online course that I've created. It's a course that's called the Deep Dive into SAP S4HANA Implementations. And in that 2.5-hour course, I get into all the basics of what SAP S4HANA is, what it takes to make the project more successful, how to manage change, how to handle the project planning, how to manage your system integrator, as well as some case studies from some of our clients and some of the lessons learned from some of our clients. So check out that training as well. So there's 2 things you could check out here, both in the links below. One is the guide to S4HANA implementations. The other is my S4HANA training course. So be sure to check it out. And our goal here is to help you be more successful in your transformation. So I hope you found this information useful, and we'll continue on with the show.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taflaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Welcome back to episode number 3 of Journey to S4HANA. This is the podcast that covers everything you need to know about S4HANA implementations, the good, the bad, the ugly, from a tech agnostic perspective. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting Group, which is a company I work for. It is a company that provides technology agnostic consulting services to clients throughout the world who are going through their S4HANA implementations and or any other sort of digital transformation. The show is also produced by Major Tom Productions. If you're interested in learning how you can sponsor your brand or product or service on this podcast or any of our other B2B technology podcasts, please feel free to reach out to Mindy. And I've included Mindy's contact information in the description field below for this podcast episode. So I'm excited for our next guest, as I mentioned before the break. First time guest on this show. First time I've interviewed him formally on camera. I've talked to the guy many times because he's a client of ours at Third Stage. He's the head of their S4HANA implementation. His name is Karm Saliba. He works with a company called Baltimore Aircoil Corporation, a make-to-order, engineer-to-order manufacturing organization that just recently implemented S4HANA. I'm going to let him describe his background and Baltimore Aircoil himself. He can describe it better than I can. But with all that being said, Karm, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me, Eric. Always good to speak to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's we've known each other for a few years now, and it's going to be interesting to really dive into your S4HANA implementation, some of the lessons learned you've had along the way. But before we get into some of those questions, maybe just tell us a little bit about you and Baltimore Aircoil.
All right. Well, my name is Karm Saliba. I've been with Baltimore Aircoil for going on 12 years now, working out of our Baltimore head office here for about 3 years. I've been in various other plants and facilities over the years before that. So Baltimore Aircoil is a manufacturer of evaporative cooling equipment. We support industrial markets, refrigeration markets, HVAC, so large scale, airports, malls, HVAC systems in spaces like that. We do cooling for large data centers. Basically, any large scale cooling that is needed, that's what Baltimore Aircoil does. We have facilities all over the world. In every continent, we have a footprint.
Great. Yeah, very, very interesting company. I've enjoyed learning about your business and just the complexities that go along with that. And that's a lot of what we'll talk about here today, is just how your implementation took some of those complexities into consideration. What was your role on the S4HANA implementation?
So I was the global lead of the project. Pretty much leading the whole implementation.
Right. Now, and I use that. I just realized I asked you that question in past tense. You actually still are the global lead, right? You're still going through the implementation, right?
We are. We're about sort of 75% or 70% through the implementation. The reason I get that number is based on our market sales, right? So about 75% of our plants in terms of volume are on SAP at the moment, but we still have a ways to go before all the regions are live.
Gotcha. Okay. So have you been through an S4HANA implementation in the past prior to this project, or an ERP implementation?
No. This was absolutely my first one. I think, we started this 2019 or 2019. Yeah, that's right. Before this, I'd obviously heard the term ERP, but that's about as far as it went. So no, I'm not an IT guy at all. I'm not an ERP guy at all. I'm really a business process guy, actually.
Right. And I remember when I first met you, you had just been tagged to be the lead on this project a few years ago when we first started working with you. And what was going through your mind at that time? So you're a business process guy. You're an engineer by right. Training, right, or by education?
Yeah. I'm an industrial engineer. Yeah.
So
yeah, I don't panic. So it wasn't panic, but it was definitely apprehension, but excitement at the same time. I had obviously started doing some reading and started watching YouTube videos and things about what does digital transformation mean, what does ERP implementation entail, and so it was both scary and exciting at the same time. On the one hand, it felt like sort of just another process, which is something that I had done many times before and implemented and improved processes. But on the other hand, it was such a large scale, taking into consideration everything from sales, manufacturing, finance, procurement. So the sheer scope of it, I think, was very exciting to me.
Yeah, and a good way to challenge yourself and move in a different direction, I imagine. Different direction than you had in the past.
Yeah, absolutely.
Be curious to hear from the audience listening here too. Just drop in the chat if you don't mind, wherever you're listening or watching. Is this your first S4HANA implementation, or have you had multiple ones? How many S4HANA implementations have you been through? I'd love to hear from the audience here as we're going through. And this will be really interesting perspective to kind of hear your first time experience. And, one of the questions I'll ask you later on is if you could go back and start over with all the knowledge you have now, what would you do differently? But I'll come back to that later. But before we get to that, first of all, why did you guys, as a company and as a team, why did you decide to embark on an S4HANA implementation?
I mean, any Google search of Baltimore Aircoil, you'll find videos like on how it's made or some other shows that we've been on. BAC is a market leader in evaporative cooling, both in terms of product innovation, but also in terms of driving customer experience. And really, that's kind of the pinnacle of our or the core of our business is making sure that we provide an exceptional customer experience, and we provide whatever it is that the customer needs in order to satisfy what their needs are, right? So the reason that we did this is because we wanted to enable ourselves to provide a better experience to our customers. Right. And so the only way that we would be able to do that is to really tie ourselves together from all the different regions around the world where we were using different ERP systems and we had different processes around the world. We needed to come together, build on global core processes, build on one global system so that we were able to benchmark and improve and really help each other climb the ladder and get better and better as a business.
Right. Yeah, it's a good, interesting perspective. A lot of clients go through this process because they have to. Their systems are broken or they're on an old version of SAP and they have a certain deadline to hit to get off that legacy version. But you guys, it sounds like maybe a little bit more strategic. You're kind of thinking about how do we make this better for our customers and really improve the business? No,
our existing ERP system actually worked pretty well. So that's why it was quite a challenge, I think, from a people perspective. To kind of transfer from the old systems to the new systems because they weren't broken. And I think that if you are on a burning platform, it makes it a little bit easier. If your system isn't working or you have to upgrade for whatever reason, that kind of, you can point to that as being the reason that you do that. But going from something that was fairly stable already, to the promise of something that's even better, that could be a little bit challenging.
Yeah. Were any parts of your business, first of all, before I ask this question, you guys grew through both organically and through acquisition, right? So you had multiple geographic locations. Sure. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And were any?
That's right. Yeah. We're all over.
Were any of those locations using S/4HANA or another older version of SAP, or was it all primarily non-SAP that you're moving now to?
It was all non-SAP. Okay. So we didn't have any SAP in-house experience at Baltimore Aircoil at all.
So another unique perspective, because I know a lot of people listening are moving to SAP for the first time, but a lot of people listening maybe have already used an older version of SAP or going to S/4HANA.
And it was across the board for us, right? So it wasn't just S/4HANA. So even though we implemented multiple modules of S/4HANA, finance, procurement, order to cash, lock, stock, and barrel on that side, we also implemented ABC, which is the Advanced Variant Configurator, CPQ, SAP CRM system, commissions. So really across the board, it was a true, in the true sense of the word, a greenfield implementation.
Did you implement success factors for HR or Concur for time and expense reporting or Ariba for procurement, any of those solutions too?
Yeah, we did. So Concur, we had it in one region, so we're expanding our use of Concur. And no, we don't use success factors.
I'm here with Karm from Baltimore Aircoil Corporation talking about a client's perspective on a recent S/4HANA implementation. I have a lot more questions for Karm, but first we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Journey to S/4HANA. Hi, this is Eric Kimberly, and I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting Group. And I wanted to take a moment and tell you a little bit about Third Stage and what we do and how we help clients through their S/4HANA implementations. First of all, Third Stage is technology agnostic, meaning that we're not affiliated with SAP. However, we do have quite a bit of experience helping clients through their S/4HANA implementations. We help clients evaluate and do a fit gap analysis of S/4HANA. We help them find the right system integrator. We help them negotiate their contracts with SAP and their system integrator. And then we also help with implementation planning and the implementation itself. So we help mobilize the right resources, make sure you've got a solid and realistic program to manage overall S/4HANA implementation. And then we'll help with the program management, the change management, as well as process improvement. We also provide some technical services around data migration, as well as architecture and system integration as well. So those are just some of the things we can do to help you through your transformation. And if you're looking for more information about it, or if you'd like to learn more, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to just bounce around ideas or be an informal sounding board for you as you begin your transformation. You can reach me by contacting me via the contact information in the links below in the description field for this podcast. So look forward to chatting with you, and we'll see you soon. Welcome back to episode number 3 of the Journey to S4HANA podcast. You can find episodes of this show every week at journeytosforhana.com. You can also find the past episodes going back to the first episode on Journey to S4HANA as well. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting and produced by Major Tom Productions. If you'd like to learn more about sponsorship opportunities on this podcast or other podcasts that Major Tom produces, be sure to reach out to Mindy. I've included her contact information below. So I'm in the middle of a conversation here. I have Karm on the show from Baltimore Aircoil. He's a customer or client of Third Stage Consulting, and he recently completed a S4HANA implementation. And I want to jump back into the conversation where I'm asking him some questions about some of the lessons he has from his implementation. So this is your first time managing an ERP implementation. You're a few years in now. What were some of the biggest surprises or lessons learned, especially early in the process? What were some of those things that stand out as maybe things you wish you knew, you wish you knew then that you learned along the way?
Yeah. There's definitely technological pieces that I learned along the way. So things like integration, which we had kind of expected it to be out of the box and ready to go. Integration between the various systems like CPQ and C4 and S4HANA. So we had to do a lot of work to get that integration up and running. I have to be honest, SAP was really fantastic throughout all of it. Even though the integration wasn't out of the box, like we kind of, believed, when we went back to SAP and told them what the problems were, they very much worked with us and they helped us, gave us direction on, well, maybe if you change this and change that, the integration would be a little bit better. But we do understand that integration isn't quite delivered as it's supposed to have been delivered. So we'll work with you and give you pointers. They never did any custom development for us or anything like that, but they certainly helped and guided us in terms of what we needed to know from them in order to make the systems work together the way that they should. So I think from that point of view, even though we learned quickly and we had them as partners, and so it wasn't that painful now that I look back on it. When we were in it, it was pretty painful. So I think if I knew that before, it would have been pretty good. But from a technological point of view, I think that was one. Another area that I wish I had known better is how long things take, especially. I can't remember what the particular thing is called. I might have to look it up and text you about it later. But there's some paradigm that says things will always take longer than expected, even if you take this thing into consideration. I can't remember what that's called, but it definitely resonates true here that, things like data and data cleansing took a tremendous amount of time longer than we thought it would, right? And it wasn't because we didn't invest the time, or it wasn't because we didn't invest the resources, because we did. We had our best people working on it. But it just takes so much time, to learn the way that data needs to behave in SAP, to take that data that we have and transform it into the way that SAP wants to see it. So if I had known that before, I think we would have put measures in place to start data before the rest of the project, even like almost before the blueprinting phase, to start with data and bring in some people that really understood data from SAP to help us get that kicked off, kind of as a parallel path to the blueprint. So I wish I had known that. And then I think the third thing is just really around organizational communication, that no matter how well you think you've communicated and how much you've communicated, it's not enough. And that even if you think people understand something and you think that your message has gone across, it probably hasn't. So you need to communicate a lot, but you need to communicate in multiple ways to make sure that you're able to get that message across as best as you can. Yeah. So I think those are the three things that if I had to go back in time, I would do, a little bit differently, or at least I would go in with a little bit more eyes wide open.
That's very interesting. And I have yet to meet a client that says, you know what, I wish we would have invested a little bit less time in organizational communication. We overdid it. We over communicated. I've yet to meet that client. So in fact, even when we're helping them, even when we do the full organizational change program, you still hear like, yeah, that was great. We're glad we did it, but man, we could have done even more than that to make it smoother.
100%.
Now, you talked about the things you didn't know as far as maybe not fully understanding how long things would take. If you were just to ballpark it here, I won't get into like asking you questions about your budget or exactly how long it took to get to different phases. But in general, if you were to go back and you had a proposal or you had a plan in front of you, you had your budget in front of you, just as a percentage, what sort of percentage buffer might you add to say, you know what, I'm going to right size this a bit more just to make it more realistic? Is there a side order of magnitude number?
I would say that all depends on who helped you create your budget in the first place. So if you've taken a budget that was given to you by one of the big SIs, you'd probably want to double it or even more, and probably triple the amount of time. right? But if you've built the budget up yourself and the timeline yourself based on experience, then maybe it's less than that, right? I would say in terms of data, double whatever you're thinking. But it's difficult to give a percentage, right? Because I don't know what the starting point is. But if you've gone to an SI, especially the big SIs, and you said, listen, this is the scope of work that we want to do. How long is it going to take? They're going to tell you a year. It's going to be 3.
Right.
So, so that's kind of my advice is just be very cognizant of the source of your information when you're planning your budget. And it isn't from any malicious, they're not coming from it from a malicious point of view. In a perfect world, in an ideal world, and there's no hiccups, and organizations come along with you willingly, and there's no surprises in the technology, and you don't have any enhancements or anything like that. Then it probably does take that amount of time. But in the real world, it's probably 3x what a big SI might tell you.
Yeah, and we always tell clients too that technology changes faster and can be implemented a lot faster than humans and organizations. Especially, a larger organization is probably going to take even longer than you guys. You guys aren't a huge company. I mean, you're not small, but you're a really good size, mid-size organization. But
yeah, exactly. That's where I put us as well. Mid-size organization. Yeah. And also understanding, right? I think the technology is one thing, but understanding of the technology is something else. So if we look at a process and we have an idea in our head of how the technology would interface with the business to drive a process, and you explain that to somebody else, their understanding might be very different, right? So they might look at it and say, yeah, that technology can do what you're asking. But when you actually get into it, no, it doesn't do it exactly the way that I was intending. So something has to give, right? Either the technology or the business process.
Right.
And I think that's where the time expands a lot. Is in that discussion between like a system integrator and understanding the technology and the business and getting them all on the same page. That takes a lot of time.
Yeah, well said. Getting your own team on the same page and getting clarity and agreement on what you want to be and what you want your processes to be and how you want to configure the system.
Exactly.
That's the stuff that takes time. It's usually not the SIs. I mean, to use your point or to reiterate your point, it's rare that an SI, you think, okay, this SI just didn't know what they were talking about when they give us the proposal. It's usually not that. It's usually that if you knew what you wanted your processes to be, and if you had a handle on your data, and if you had a solid change management plan, then yes, you could probably implement in the timeline or the budget they give you. But the problem is most organizations don't have that stuff, and end up taking longer to make some of those decisions.
And it's almost impossible to get it, right? That's the thing. I mean, our blueprint just for the product configuration piece, right? Just for that piece, the blueprint was over 400 pages. 400 pages, like a novel.
Right.
And still, when we went live or we were in the final stages of testing, it was like, yeah, that's not really what we meant, right? When we described the process, and we literally, I worked it out the other day. It was a ridiculous. It was hundreds of hours of workshops, and hundreds of pages of documents. But you're still going to miss the mark.
Right.
So you're going to need to plan for that if possible.
Yeah, absolutely. At a real high level, without, drawing an org chart for us, how would you describe or summarize how you structured the project team in general, both for yourself, for your internal team internally within your company, as well as how you engaged with the system integrator and other third parties?
Yeah. So from the beginning, our strategy was that we want to do as much of it ourselves. So I just wanted to start off with that, right? So even though we did engage with a large SI in the beginning and then moved over to a smaller SI, it was always our strategy that we want to drive this. And there was partly, a lot of it had to do with your advice, Eric. You said this, I still remember the first time that we met, you said, no matter how good your SI is, you want to make sure that this is your project and that you drive this project. And that's something that we really took to heart. And we definitely tried to do that. So in terms of structure, we had a core team of global people. So for each of the work stream areas, so procurement, finance, etc., there was a global lead, but then also within each of our regions, there was a lead for each of those functions. So we structured the team that way. And then each of those, let's say, smaller teams within a work stream had an SI partner, right? So it was one SI, which helped us with things like project management, at least right in the beginning. But then they had one or two or a small team of people within each function partnering with the business team. And that's the way that we were structured.
Okay. And how did that work out? Do you feel like that was appropriate, or is there anything you would have done differently now, knowing what you know now as far as how how that was structured?
No, I'm happy with the way that it worked out, and even, I mean, several years into it now, we've kind of restructured a little bit, become a little bit leaner and more agile, but the structure itself hasn't changed a whole lot. So I think that's the right it was the right approach. I think that we were also grateful that we were able to switch out some of the consulting partners. If things don't work, if it isn't a good fit, not necessarily because they didn't know what to do, but maybe a particular consultant didn't quite fit with the business culture, that we were able to swap those out. So make sure that you build yourself in that flexibility, right? You don't want to be stuck in a situation where, all right, well, these are your consultants, and now you're kind of married to them for the next however many years. You want that flexibility, but then also make sure that you're looking inward as well, right? So sometimes you might have to switch out some business people that are in that team as well, right? Who are not quite fitting the bill. So just be cognizant and mindful of that.
I'm here with Karm from Baltimore Aircoil Corporation, talking about a client's perspective on a recent S4HANA implementation. I have a lot more questions for Karm, but first we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Journey to S4HANA. People oftentimes ask me how I built such a strong social media following on YouTube and LinkedIn and Facebook and other outlets. And the fact of the matter is it took me a long time to build a following through a lot of trial and error, making a lot of mistakes. Had I known that there were companies out there that could help me build my brand, I would have done that a long time ago. I didn't know that, but the good news is that there is today a consulting firm that will help you through building your own personal brand through some of their training programs. The company is called Roloff Consulting, and if you're familiar with Emma Roloff, she's someone that I've had on this podcast before, and she's well known in the digital transformation space as well as the sales space. And she's big on TikTok, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And she and her husband have started a training course and a training company that focuses on helping people build their personal brands and helping them to sell themselves digitally. So whether you're a salesperson that's trying to reach more customers or you're an individual that's just trying to build your personal brand, that's something that they help with through their training programs. And they've offered listeners of this podcast a free 5-day LinkedIn challenge. And I encourage you to check it out. I've included a link below for this podcast. If you go to the podcast notes, you'll find a link that gets you free access to this 5-day challenge where you'll get step-by-step guidance. You'll get real results. So you'll get some tangible results from the program. And you also get a special offer at the end of it. So it's exclusive to listeners of this podcast. Be sure to check out the link below if you want to work on building your personal brand, or if you're in sales and you're trying to reach more people. Whatever the case may be, check it out. It's free to listeners of this podcast. You can check it out via the link below.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you'll want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how you can take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Welcome back to episode number 3 of the Journey to S4HANA podcast. You can find episodes of this show every week at journeytosforhana.com. You can also find the past episodes going back to the first episode on Journey to S4HANA as well. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting and produced by Major Tom Productions. If you'd like to learn more about sponsorship opportunities on this podcast or other podcasts that Major Tom produces, be sure to reach out to Mindy. I've included her contact information below. So I'm in the middle of a conversation here. I have Karm on the show from Baltimore Aircoil. He's a customer or client of Third Stage Consulting, and he recently completed a S4HANA implementation. And I want to jump back into the conversation where I'm asking him some questions about some of the lessons he has from his implementation. Now, you mentioned swapping out not only individual consultants, but you mentioned that you started off with a large SI and then you ended up shifting and moving to a smaller SI. Why was that? I mean, what was the impetus for that change, and did it work out better to have the smaller SI, and why?
Yeah, I mean, it's not, I don't classify it as, we did something wrong or the SI did something wrong. I think we were at a different place in the journey. We got through probably halfway through our blueprinting phase with the larger SI. And then we just found that, things change, and that what we needed at that time was different to what we needed in the beginning. And we learned a lot from the big SI, and we got a lot out of them, and they took us very far in our journey. But we needed to, number one, accelerate the work that we were taking on ourselves, and B, we wanted a partner that was a little bit more nimble and agile than some of the big SIs. So, the second SI that we went for was a smaller firm. We had direct connection with the CEO. The CEO was actually here in our offices several times. If there was an issue, we were able to escalate it very, very quickly all the way up the chain. And so we were at just that phase in the project where we needed a partner that was kind of able to have our back, but let us take the lead.
Right. Yeah.
Now,
that's interesting. And I think, one thing I noticed that's a interesting dynamic is that a lot of times organizations are almost afraid to make a change like that. And did you guys have any hesitation, or did you have any sort of immense pressure not to make that change, especially from the big SI who has a lot of resources to focus on making sure you don't make that change?
No, so yes, there was a lot of people saying, "Are you sure you want to do this? This is crazy. Nobody changes SIs halfway through a blueprinting phase. You don't want to do this." But I must be honest that pressure did not come from the big SI. It wasn't like that at all. I think we've always been very open, very honest, very transparent with them. And we were with them the whole time as well. We said to them, "Look, we're kind of coming to the end of this partnership or this relationship. I'm sure we'll make use of you again in the future, but this isn't quite what we need right now." So we were very transparent with them. They certainly didn't push back at all. And they were helpful as much as they could be. Internally, there were some people that were saying, "Are you sure this is the right thing to do?" But we were sure that it's the right thing to do, and it worked out well for us. Obviously, we were careful, and we made sure that we had everything as much as possible documented that we had already completed up until that point. We made sure that critical areas were firmly within our control. We didn't want the big SI to leave, and then we're completely clueless in a particular area. So obviously, we were careful, but there is an element of faith in it, right? You've got to have faith in yourself, and you've got to have faith in the team and in the company, and you got to just do what you think is right. And that's really the only way that we know how to succeed, right? Is to take chances where it's appropriate, and if you fail, recover quickly. But if you don't, then you'll reap the reward.
That's interesting. Now, if you could go back, and with the benefit of hindsight, would you have hired that smaller SI to start, or do you think that worked out well, what you did? SI to get you going?
I genuinely believe that it worked out well, and it worked out the way that it would. And there's, apart from a few things like what I mentioned earlier about communication and about data, there are honestly not too many things that I would do differently. And one of the things that came up fairly recently is I was asked a question about, why didn't we, do more testing before we went live, or why didn't we do this before we went live, or why didn't we do that? And I genuinely believe that, things like going live and going through some of the pains that we and every company experience when they go live, you could only have learned if you went live, right? So no amount of testing would have prevented that. And I believe the same thing with the system with the SIs, right? So I think that yes, we had to change, but the lessons that we learned from day zero up until the point where we changed SIs, we could not have learned those lessons in any other way. So if we had taken the smaller SI from the beginning, we would have missed out on an opportunity to learn what we did from the other SI. So, long story short, no, I would have done it the same way again and again, no matter how many times I would do it.
Right. Yeah, that's very interesting. So you've talked about data, organizational communication, understanding the technology. Those were some of the things that there were sort of surprises or things you learned along the way. Were there other big challenges that you face that we haven't already covered, like big speed bumps or pitfalls that you ran into throughout the project?
There were a few. It's actually funny. The one thing that pops into my mind is myself and my boss actually were at an SAP Executive Innovation Council a few months ago, and one of the things that one of the people said over there was people think that newer technology, because it's newer in and of itself, it's going to be faster. And that isn't necessarily the case. So I think that there were some surprises in terms of speed of things. I think that we had expected that certain processes, just because it's a brand new software, it's going to be lightning quick, and it doesn't necessarily always work out that way. In fact, I think it was mentioned even at Stratosphere around that as well, around speed. Where people, they have the expectation that newer technology is faster, and it isn't necessarily. So I think that was one of the surprises along the way as well. That some processes are actually a little bit slower in the new system, right? And I think that you just need to check yourself in terms of the assumptions that you make around certain things. I guess is my takeaway.
Yeah, and I'd say that's even more true. It's very true no matter what, but even more true for legacy SAP customers that are used to R3 or ECC, that's got a certain level of maturity and decades of R&D behind it, that you've had the benefit of time in testing and working out the kinks, and it's just more mature in a lot of ways. And a lot of times people will just take a leap of faith that, well, ECC can do A, B, and C, so surely S4HANA is going to be able to do
Exactly.
A, B, and C. And that's not always the case.
Exactly.
How about you guys? You guys being a fairly complex organization, I've gotten to know your operations over the years, and you're not manufacturing an easy product. It's not a widget that's produced in high volumes and it's a repeatable or a standard commodity that you're producing. You're producing a high ticket or a high dollar engineerable product.
Yep.
Yeah, highly customizable. You talked about customer experience earlier and how important that is to you. And you've got a lot of different variations for how you can configure your products. Did you operationally within the business and functionally within S4HANA, were there any major gaps or showstoppers or big things that were difficult for you to work through?
Showstoppers, no, but difficult, yes. So, I think we've obviously learned a tremendous amount over the last few years. But I think that even for SAP, our products are pretty complex, and I think that we've tested the ABC, the Advanced Variant Configurator that SAP has, and the way that ABC interacts with the product configurator CPQ. I think we've tested that almost to the limits in terms of product complexity, right? Because our product is first selected based on various parameters, and then once selected based on various parameters, it's configured based on customer needs, and then in probably 80% of the cases, it is then engineered to order on top of that configuration. So it's really a selection on top of a selection, a configuration on top of a configuration, and that stretched the capability, I think, for SAP, pretty far. But again, having said that, I've been really surprised at how responsive SAP has been to that. I think that, we've obviously learned from them a lot, but I think that they've realized that they can learn a lot from us, and that if they're able to help us, get our product configuration, selection, engineered to order working well in their system, it's going to be a benefit to their other customers as well. And they've come to the party. I mean, we have conversations with their development teams in Germany. We're on various SAP innovation councils. We meet with them weekly. So they've been very, very responsive, which again I was surprised by, because we're not a small company, but we're not SAP. And we were worried, or at least I was worried, that would be a rounding error on their income sheet. But it hasn't turned out that way at all. They've really been very, very responsive. But in terms of product configuration, yeah, I think that this is pretty complex. I think this is about as far as SAP has come in terms of product selection, configuration, and engineer to order.
I'm here with Karm from Baltimore Aircoil Corporation, talking about a client's perspective on a recent S4HANA implementation. I have a lot more questions for Karm, but first we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Journey to S4HANA.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Welcome back to episode number 3 of the Journey to S4HANA podcast. You can find episodes of this show every week at journeytosforhana.com. You can also find the past episodes going back to the first episode on Journey to S4HANA as well. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting and produced by Major Tom Productions. If you'd like to learn more about sponsorship opportunities on this podcast or other podcasts that Major Tom produces, be sure to reach out to Mindy. I've included her contact information below. So I'm in the middle of a conversation here. I have Karm on the show from Baltimore Aircoil. He's a customer or client of Third Stage Consulting, and he recently completed a S4HANA implementation. And I want to jump back into the conversation where I'm asking him some questions about some of the lessons he has from his implementation. I want to come back to something you mentioned earlier. You talked about organizational communication and how you wish you would have done more of that. You also talked about how you were operating up until now. You've been operating on multiple ERP systems throughout the world. And so you've had different presumably different business processes, different ways of doing business in different parts of the world. Was S4HANA sort of a culture shock because you're rolling out a common platform for the entire organization, but B, S4HANA, let's face it, is fairly rigid. I mean, relatively rigid compared to other systems, especially if you've got with homegrown systems and things like that. Was it a culture shock? And if so, how did you navigate just more the people's acceptance of the product?
So I think, before I answer the question, I want to say that, BAC, we have a strong culture of innovation. I think you know that about our business. And again, any Google search will tell you the same. So I think that inherently we're able to deal with change fairly well. But yes, it was a culture shock. So, but not an unintended one, right? So I think that that's exactly what we wanted to do. We wanted to streamline our processes. We wanted to build a little bit more structure within our business processes while still giving ourselves the flexibility and the ability to be nimble and agile in the marketplace. So I think it had the intended result, or at least it is having the intended result. But yes, you're right. SAP demands, that you follow a strict process. SAP demands that the data that you feed in it is clean and correct and complete and accurate. So from that point of view, I think we're still learning. All right, and we'll continue to learn. And I think only once you've gotten over that hump will you really start taking advantage of the benefits of SAP. Right? When clean data is a foregone conclusion, and when completing transactions timeously is a foregone conclusion, you can't receive something and then leave it in the corner and not receive it in SAP for 2-3 days and hope that your inventory is going to work out well, or your product costing is going to work out well, because it doesn't. You've got to transact in real time almost to reap the benefits of an integrated system like SAP.
So did you guys find that there's a tension between the innovation, the culture of innovation that you've historically had as a company and the standardization that SAP was introducing into your operations? Or have you found a way or figured out how to balance that and coexist both sides?
We've found a way now. I would lie if I said that it was, smooth sailing from the beginning. It absolutely wasn't. But I do think that there's definitely light at the end of the tunnel. I think that we're starting to reach that end of the tunnel, where we are finding, a way to coexist. And again, that's exactly what we wanted, right? We didn't want to build in processes that were so rigid that it would stifle the innovation and stifle the creativity, because that isn't what we're about. But on the other hand, we wanted to make sure that we work within a framework, right? And I definitely think that we've gotten to a point now, at least for the regions that are live, that we're starting to strike that balance, and then taking those lessons and paying them forward to the regions that still need to go live.
Yeah, very interesting. We have another client that recently deployed S4HANA. In fact, I'm trying to get him to be on the show as well, or the CIO from this organization. And he made a comment that was really interesting and sort of stuck with me. And he said that as they were going through the S4HANA implementation, and they're another global company, they've got, I think, 50 or 60 locations throughout the world. And he was saying that as they were deploying S4HANA at these different locations, they found that once the location was up and running and stable and sort of optimizing their use of SAP, they were actually more flexible than the legacy, the remainder of the organization that was still on the legacy systems, which I found really interesting, because you don't hear that often when you talk about S4HANA. You don't think flexibility and innovation necessarily. From a process perspective, in my mind, I think standardization, common data model, common processes and workflows. But that doesn't necessarily mean it comes at the expense of flexibility or innovation.
Yeah, I don't know this individual, but I agree with him, and I'm sure I'll like him if I ever had to meet him, because he's absolutely 100% correct. And it's within that framework that you can really be free to be creative and to have that flexibility and allow you to be nimble and to meet the customer expectations. When everything is chaos, it might feel like you have that freedom to do whatever you want, but really what you're doing is spending most of your time putting out fires and making small corrections. Whereas if you kind of relieve yourself of that burden, then you can really be creative. So I absolutely agree with what they're saying.
Very good. So I've sort of alluded to this. I'll ask it again, maybe more directly, but if you could go back and do it over, you know what you know now, you go back and you start over on day one, the day they tell you, the day your higher ups tell you, hey, we want to target you to be the guy to head up this project.
Mm-hmm.
What would you do differently? Or is there a couple things you might say, here's one thing. I know you mentioned, for example, the project plan and the budget, you would have added some buffer, added more time there. Is there anything else though that you would do differently?
No, so I've mentioned the communication. I've mentioned data. I think overall, over and above what I've already mentioned, is be relentless in challenging, or I would be relentless in challenging people's expectations of customizations in the system. And I know that is, it's so passe to say, you should stick to standard SAP and not customize, but be relentless in challenging what people think that they need. Because you're going to have a lot of very intelligent, very well-respected people that are convinced that they need certain enhancements or processes to work in certain ways, but they really don't. And it's just because, their rivers of thought are so well ingrained and they are so intelligent and well respected that they convince everyone around them that this is the way that a process needs to work. And I would have, I think, challenged a little bit more than I did in certain areas. And I think that we did a really good job in keeping the core clean, as they say, and not doing any enhancements within SAP's core. But I think we could have shaved off a few more of the enhancements that we did if we knew then what we know now. And I probably would have challenged a little bit more than I did.
Yeah, that's very interesting. What percentage, if you had to estimate, just order of magnitude, what percentage of the system in the locations where you've already deployed and gone live, what percentage of the system and the capabilities and the opportunities are you actually leveraging in the system? I assume it's not 100%, but where do you think you fall?
Well, it depends what you mean by leveraging, right? So if you're asking me where are we using 100% of SAP's capability, I would say nowhere.
Right.
If you're asking me, what percentage of the system are we fairly comfortable with and using on a day-to-day basis, I would say 80 to 90%.
Okay.
But I think we're at the point now where we're almost on parity of where we were before the go live. But there are so many more features that we haven't turned on yet. Because we needed to get to a point where everyone is comfortable. They were able to come up for air. We're not in a hypercare situation where everyone's still kind of learning what everything is. And now we can start flipping some of these automation switches, right? Which is what will really take us to the next level. And we're only starting to do that now. And every area within the business, that we've implemented SAP, which is virtually everywhere, has these levers that we can pull. So I think this is just the beginning.
That's a great point. I think it's okay, and you guys have proven that it's okay to say, let's just focus in phase one or the first part of the project to get back to where we were on the old system, and not try to boil the ocean, not try to add all this new stuff like, all the machine learning and AI stuff that S4HANA has. Great stuff, but you don't need to turn it on that first go live.
It's overwhelming.
Phase.
Yeah. And to be completely transparent, we tried that in a few places, right? We tried turning on the fancy stuff, and it's just overwhelming. It overwhelms people who are already overwhelmed trying to learn a brand new system. And then you turn on this automation where the system is scheduling stuff for you and buying stuff without you knowing about it, and sending emails to customers, and you're like, whoa, let's turn this down for a minute. So we kind of had to turn it down a little bit again, and now we're starting again to switch some of those things back on again.
Yeah. It's almost too overwhelming for organizations to not only learn a new system and new processes, but now you're adding all new, like just new ways of doing business, which is a lot to digest. So last question I've got for you, Karm, is if you're here giving advice, which you are, whether you realize it or not, you're giving advice to people that are going through S4HANA implementations right now. What are the two or three things that you would suggest or leave as a takeaway as far as advice to someone who's early in the project or about to get started on an S4HANA implementation? Those things that you wish you knew, when you started.
Yeah, I think I've spoken a little bit about things that I've wished that I knew. But if I had to give advice, kind of more directly, is make sure that you do have the senior leadership's back, that they have your back and that you have their support. We have, our global leadership team has really been fantastic, and we couldn't have done it without their support and them driving this. A lot of people will go into a project like this, and again, this is new for me, but I've since networked and spoken to many other people that have done this, and a lot of people will think, yeah, we have our CEO support or we have our VP support. Make sure that they understand what it is that you're actually doing here. You're not just implementing a new computer program, right? You're in essence turning the business upside down and rebuilding it. So make sure that your leadership team understands what you're about to do, understands the magnitude that of the change that's coming, and understands that this isn't going to be a chart that's going to go up. It's going to go down quite steeply before it goes up again. Make sure that they know that and that they support that.
Right.
So that would be my one bit of advice. And then I can't mention again how important the role of communication is in the organization, both up and downstream. And even things like documenting decisions that are made. So if you have communication, you have a meeting, you sit around a table, you agree on something. Make sure that is documented, because in a year's time, 2 years' time, someone is going to challenge that decision, and it is going to be a nightmare for you to have to dig through emails and post-it notes to try and figure out why you made the decision 2 years ago. Because then they're going to be like, well, you can't give me a good reason, so we're going to rehash this conversation, which probably took 6 months to put to bed 2 years ago. So find yourself a good way of organizing all of the decisions that are made in a way that you can refer back to them again at any point in time.
Right.
That's something that I wish that I had done a better job at, and it would have saved me a ton of time over the last few years.
Yeah, organizations and people often forget, and you're not going to remember everything either. Which is the other thing. There's so many decisions that get made and trade-offs that are made and that sort of thing. And all it takes is that one person that says, "Hey, why in the world did we do this? Who agreed to this? Who decided this?" And if you can't back it, then suddenly you've got a change issue on your hands.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, that's sound advice. I appreciate you being here today to share your experiences and
thank you.
Give us your advice too. So thanks very much for being here. Appreciate it. Hopefully we can.
Thanks, Eric. Always great to speak to you.
Yeah, great to speak with you too. Hopefully we can have you back on as you get further into the project and as you get past the full implementation, see what additional lessons you have. So yeah, thank you again.
Looking forward to it. Bye, Eric.
All right. Thanks, Karm. A lot of great takeaways there from Karm, and learned a lot from that conversation. In fact, there's a couple things we want to build on and elaborate on here in just a moment. But first, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more of the Journey to S4HANA podcast.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberly, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Welcome back to episode number 3 of the Journey to S4HANA podcast. You can find current and past episodes and future episodes at journeytosforhana.com. This podcast is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, and you can find any sponsorship opportunities you might be interested in. You can contact Mindy at Major Tom Productions. I've included her contact information below. So, Darian, we just had Karm on the show. I enjoyed the conversation with him. I'm curious to hear what you think and what sort of takeaways and questions you have from that conversation.
Yeah, I love hearing his perspective as not only a client perspective, but also just a different perspective than maybe we're used to hearing. And I also think it's really interesting that he had just a perspective from a specific industry like manufacturing, for example, that maybe you don't always get to hear what the exact lessons from your industry are. So I thought that was a really cool thing that I hope our audience enjoyed as well. But with that, besides for the manufacturing industry, what are some other major industries that maybe can look at the lessons from the manufacturing industry, for example, and maybe take those lessons and apply it to their implementation?
Yeah, that's a great question, because a lot of people listening might be wondering, if they're not in the manufacturing and distribution space, is this case study or some of the lessons from it, is it relevant to me? And I think it is. It's a lot of what he talked about is relevant in any sort of organization or industry. What I like about manufacturing, and the reason why it's always, in my opinion, effective to dive into manufacturing case studies, is because there's so much complexity in a manufacturing environment. Everything from raw material procurement to the way you produce and manufacture the products, to the way you distribute it, to the way you take orders and configure products, the way you track costs and close the books, and all that stuff is complex compared to some other industries. So that's why I like some of these. I don't want to call it an extreme example, but it's a complex example, especially for the size organization they are. They're not a huge organization, but they have more complexity than a lot of huge organizations do. And so, if you're in financial services or education or something that has really unique, different complexities, those are the things that can typically hang up or cause problems in a project. So, yeah, to answer your question, I think most of what he talked about, if not all of it, is stuff that's going to be relevant to any organization, whether you're in manufacturing distribution or not.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And it's super cool that people can take what they learn from this industry and apply it to the next one. So there was some really good points there, Eric. And I'm going to hand it to you to wrap up today's podcast.
Yeah, great session. Enjoyed having the Karm on as a guest. I hope to have him on again because after we were done with that conversation, I had a bunch of other questions that I thought of after the fact. So we'll have to have him on for a part 2, especially as he learns more and things settle down more for him. And thank you, Darian, for being here today and for hosting this as always. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, an independent tech agnostic consulting firm that helps clients with their S4HANA implementations as well as other types of digital transformations. The show is produced by Major Tom Productions. If you'd like to learn more about sponsorship opportunities, please reach out to Mindy. I've included Mindy's contact information in the description field below. And stick around for future episodes. Next week, we're going to have Len Riley from a company called Upper Edge. He's going to be on the show talking about Rise and Grow and what it means to your procurement process and your overall implementation. So we're going to really hone in on some of these special initiatives and programs that SAP is rolling out and talk about the realities of what it means to your negotiation and implementation perspectives. Future episodes are going to cover a lot of different topics, from more case studies to change management to SAP's AI and innovation perspectives or AI and innovation investments. So there's a lot of stuff we're going to cover in future episodes. So be sure to check out new episodes at journeytos4hana.com. We'll be back with a new episode next week. So in the meantime, take care, have a great week, and we'll see you next week on the Journey to S4HANA podcast.